Hello and welcome back to Hacking Interview Pro Tips, I think number 11 now. I have the great honor of sitting down with Justin Kennedy, who has agreed to donate his time on a Saturday afternoon. So thanks very much for doing that.
No problem.
For those that aren't familiar with Justin, on BugCrowd, currently ranked 31, which is really impressive. I know that you and Patrick Ferenbaugh have been battling it out, and you were neck and neck, but it looks like you've taken quite the lead with 31, and he's at 36. So
Yeah.
Patrick, if you're listening, hopefully kick that up a notch.
Yeah, I actually this morning I checked. I thought I was 32, so that's a good surprise. I was 34 2 days ago or so.
Oh, nice. Not bad. It's always nice to be moving up those rankings. The gamification, I don't know, for me, it keeps things moving.
Absolutely.
And then over on HackerOne, I was really impressed with, you've got 20 bugs, but the programs that they're coming from are, they're competitive programs. Yahoo there 3 years ago, but still there. Pornhub, Yelp, Starbucks, Discourse, and then of course the U.S. Department of Defense. Really impressive targets. So for those reasons and plenty more that you'll hear in the interview, I wanted to sit down and chat with you. And then obviously just a quick plug, but you're currently the Director of Offensive Security and Red Teaming at NTT Com Security, right? Is that still correct?
Yeah, it's actually NTT Security now, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we just dropped the com.
Nice. Okay. So with that, why don't we dive right into it? The other day, I sent you the questions, and then I've gone ahead and I've updated the first one because I listened to the interview that you and Sam did from BugCrowd.
Sure.
And so I was originally going to ask you how you got started hacking and when, but then the interview you talked about how you've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, quite a while. I've been doing it probably since all my life I've really done computers and messed around with security here and there and whatnot, but I've been probably hacking actively since the early 2000s.
Okay, right on. In the interview, you mentioned with Sam that I saw the peek out. So
Yeah.
you mentioned with Sam that you had the public programs like Facebook and that kind of thing that kicked off from the bounty perspective, and that kind of jumped you into the bug bounty programs. Is that kind of how it started?
You know what? I don't really remember exactly what my first program was. I think I was doing a couple with Netflix before they had a public program. Before they actually had a paid program, I found a couple good bugs there.
Yeah.
And then I joined HackerOne years ago when I saw that Yahoo had such a open scope, which is, the more attack surface you have, the easier, the better, the more bugs you can find. And then, God, I forget when I joined, but one of the first bounties I did with BugCrowd was actually an IoT bounty, which I had a lot of fun with. So then I just kind of checked them out a bit more.
Oh, right on. And so had you ever done the IoT stuff before that?
Here and there I had been, hacking apps and networks and whatnot before that. So I just figured, hey, IoT, let's see what this thing is. Let's see how we could attack it, and kind of took it from that way. One of the interesting bugs there was when you were first setting up this IoT device. I believe it was a camera. I believe it was a camera. It actually spins up a wireless access point itself for you to connect to it and configure it before you have it connect to your network. And one of the interesting bugs there was, of course, displaying all of the other SSIDs around it to see which one you could connect to. Just had a pretty standard cross-site scripting in it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty funny.
Nice. That's awesome. So on that note, it sounds like you're kind of learning as you're hacking with the opportunities. I know for me, as I've progressed through different bug bounty programs, I go back and I think about where I started originally and what I'm doing now, and I know there's plenty of bugs that I must have missed. Is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew back then when you were starting?
Yeah, a ton. I mean, with all of the technologies that you see when you're doing bug programs, you don't run into this stuff just every day unless you're doing these types of programs and you see all these different technologies. So things like Angular, just jumping into things like Oracle SQL injection. There's just tons of bugs that you don't really see until you encounter those technologies. Even some of the server-side template injection stuff that Albino Wax published a couple years ago, those are things I definitely wish I would have known back then.
Yeah, it's those are great for those that kind of aren't following or haven't heard of those. The server-side template injection can end up leading you to remote code execution, right?
That's huge.
Angular, you're looking at the sandbox escapes for cross-site scripting.
Yep.
Both of the, yeah, the amount that they share over at Portswigger, specifically with James too, being head of research, it's awesome,
Yeah,
and
they,
it's great to see that kind of come out. Yeah.
absolutely.
So then, has your approach to hacking changed since you've started? Like you've been doing it for a long time, you've got the background in security, but does that methodology change as you learn about these new things, or is it really like a standard methodology of walking through an application and then having that knowledge of, oh, this might be a vulnerability or this could be exploited?
Absolutely. So I don't think the methodology changes too much at a high level. I think when you learn new bug classes or types of attacks, you kind of just put them into your methodology. And then as you're walking through your standard methodology, exploring the application, exploring the network, you come across something where you're like, hey, wait a minute, that trick I learned, last year or a couple months ago, that may apply here. So you try it out, and then, hopefully it does apply.
Yeah. And so when you have that kind of light bulb moment where you see that, is that the kind of opportunity for you, like where you hunker down and it might be spending 5 minutes or like reading your write up on the PHP? I can't think of the program now, but where you mentioned that at one point you spent hours on it.
Oh, I spent a lot of time on that. So the way that actually popped up was I was looking at a HackerOne program that I thought had pretty open scope, but turned out it didn't.
Hmm.
And I was just proxying everything through Burp, and Burp by default will pick up on any sort of objects that it sees, PHP objects that it sees. So I wasn't even actively scanning anything. I was just kind of poking around, spying into the app manually, walking through, seeing what the functionality was, and I saw that there, and I said, hey, object injection. If that's true, this could get interesting.
Yeah.
Sure enough, you look at the finding, you look at the, I believe it was in a cookie there,
Yeah.
and it was like, yeah, this is definitely object injection. Let's see what we can do here. So then it was just a matter, the software was open source, so I downloaded the software, started looking through the code, found where that exact trigger was, where that object was being used, and then looked at kind of the security around it, and from there it was just kind of one bug into the other bug into the other bug. I worked with a couple of folks on it. There was a couple things I wasn't strong at. So, and I have, lots of buddies around that have some knowledge in certain places that I lack it, and vice versa. So
Yeah.
even said, hey, this is definitely vulnerable. What do we think is a good way that we could do this here? And after getting a couple tricks and, trying those things out and spending probably a couple days on it.
Oh, really?
A couple days, probably, I don't know, I may have spent, let's see, maybe a good 20, 30 hours over the course of a week and a half, 2 weeks or so. Writing up POCs, going through each step of it, finally got it. And it was awesome. So
That is. And so one of the things that struck me was you talked about the program. They didn't have that open scope, so they didn't pay you for it, right?
right. So actually, the software itself, I didn't know this until after the fact, was that, or rather until I started looking at on one program, was the software Express Engine actually has their own bounty as well. So that was pretty interesting. When I found that out, I was like, great. If I find a bug here and I can write up some POC and explain it to them in a way that they're like, yeah, that's definitely a problem. We're going to fix it. I was like, hey, I could just submit to both these programs. I didn't really look to see if Expression Engine paid before I started looking into it, because I started looking into it on the other program that did pay.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, unfortunately, it didn't end up being in scope. But hey, it happens. Not a big deal.
Yep. And I mean, at the end of the day, so one of the things that I wanted to ask, like where I've had those situations where I spent a lot of time and maybe I didn't end up finding a bug, but I learned about a whole new vulnerability class I didn't know about. There's
Sure.
still that knowledge piece that comes out.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the money's fun. The kudos are fun. But really, you're learning. You're getting to hack things, which I think a lot of hunters. That's the reason why they do it. Is they just love hacking. So just because I didn't get any money or any kudos or what have you, at least in the programs or reputation, if you will, it was still fun to go and do it, and I learned a lot. And then I was able to write up that blog post we did on Foxglove. And a lot of people learned from it, I hope. So it was definitely very fun to do, and I would definitely do it again.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, at least speaking for myself, I can say I definitely learned a lot. So
Awesome.
big thanks for the write up.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, Before we actually move on from that topic, I found it really interesting that so Bert flagged it for you, and
Yep.
then you actually went and grabbed your own local instance of it and walked
Yep.
through the code.
Absolutely.
And so, is that something that like you have the opportunity to do often when it's an open source project, and you'll take that step? Is that something that it's not new to you, right?
Yeah, so anytime that the target or the application is open scope, I will always grab the source for it because that way you're not doing it blind. You can look at the code, you can see why things are or are not working. You can find additional vulnerabilities. So yeah, I mean with that, that's when I found the type juggling there
Yeah,
because I knew I had to get to that object injection somehow. I saw the security that was around it doing the hash check. And I was like, okay, well, here's another bug because you're doing this loose comparison. So without having the source, I probably wouldn't have known that, and it wouldn't have turned into anything.
nice. That's awesome, and I think that's again a huge tip for those that are out there and doing bug bounties when you have open source to actually take a look at things and get familiar with code, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with object injection as well, you can't really do that blind. You need to know what you can leverage, what code you can leverage. So you definitely have to have the source for that anyway.
Nice. Um, so we kind of touched on it, and I'm curious, kind of to dive deeper into it. When you sit down to hack, what does it look like for you? Like, are you finding bugs immediately within minutes, seconds, hours, or are there times where there's the dry spells like this, where you touch on something, but then you end up spending days on it?
Sure. I mean, I think everybody's going to go through dry spells. It depends on what exactly you're trying to do, and also the target you're going after. If there's not a bug there, there's not a bug there.
Yeah.
But then again, it depends also on the scope of the program. So if there isn't a bug there and they have a large scope, sometimes it's better to just move on.
Yeah.
And sometimes you find bugs before you even start looking at the application itself. So during your reconnaissance.
Hmm. Okay, that's good. That's interesting to know. For me, and I've talked to other people, and maybe it's because I'm so new, but I've had those times where, I get a dry spell and then I get into my own head and I sit there and I think, am I actually going to find anything? Is this the end of the game for me? Am I done bug hunting? Should I just move on? Do you ever
No.
have those questions where it's kind of like you start kind of questioning your own abilities, or is it kind of you've been in the game so long, you've seen so much that there's definitely going to be bugs out there. How do you get past that mental challenge?
Sure, absolutely. So there will always be bugs there. There will always be bugs out there, and I mean, in terms of questioning your own skill, I think everybody does at some point. But I mean, at the end of the day, there are things that you know, and there's things you don't know. The industry is so large, and not everybody can learn everything in the industry. It's not possible.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody should ever doubt themselves with their skill set as long as they are trying to continue to learn and they are actively learning new things. So in those dry spells, hey, maybe you want to go take a look at another program for a little while, kind of reset your brain on the application that you're working on if you're not finding anything. I actually tend to be one of those types of people that, and this happens quite often in bug hunting and CTFing, where some people need to get up, take a step back, go for a walk, get a coffee, something like that. I'm actually the opposite, where if I'm CTFing or bug hunting, I just kind of sit there and I keep hammering away. Eventually, you're going to find something. You're going to come up with an epiphany. You're going to see something that you didn't see that you should have seen, 10 hours ago.
Yeah.
And now you feel, stupid and you're kicking yourself for it. But hey, you found it now. So just keep hammering away or get up and take a walk, get some coffee, what have you, kind of clear your head and take a shower. I mean, shower thoughts is a real thing. I've been in the shower and I've just thought, wait a minute, if I do this, no, that should work. And then, get out of the shower real quick and go, type it in and hit enter. And you're like, wow, okay, yeah, just had to step away for just a second. So, there's lots of things you can do around it to get around that. But never stop. Don't stop. Keep going and keep driving and don't doubt yourself.
Well, that's awesome. It's great to hear, and I can relate to the shower thoughts. I've
Oh,
definitely had
absolutely.
those, and it's like you can't get out of there fast enough, right? Like you
Yeah.
just yeah, got to run back to the computer. So you mentioned touching on the learning piece and kind of going back to that. Where do you go to learn? Like when you've been doing this so long, you've been arguably you've seen a lot that's out there.
Sure.
Where are you going for new knowledge?
New knowledge is Twitter. I follow quite a few people on Twitter. If something happens in the industry or a new bug comes out, like Struts, the new Struts bug, then it's on Twitter almost
Yeah.
immediately, all the time. So that's going to be your quickest place to at least learn news,
Yeah.
right? Places like Reddit, rnetsec, is a great place for information as well. Generally, the content there is of high quality
Hmm.
most of the time. Um, I'm actually a moderator there, so we do moderate pretty aggressively, but we're really trying to keep that signal to noise ratio and keep the quality of the content there. And then learning from other people. I mean, there's the few Slack channels that a lot of folks are in the community. Just learning from one another is really important. And the help channel in the Bug Bounty Forum Slack is a fantastic place where if you're not sure about something, you see something you think is vulnerable, there's a lot of great people in there that you can go and ask for help, and a lot of them are great and love to help. So it's a good community for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I try to keep I try to read through everything that happens on that Slack group, specifically around the help, because there's so much that ends up like there's so much that I read there and I'm like, wow, I did not know about that, or like it's crazy to think you can do X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
and you're really active on that help channel, and it's something I wanted to ask you about here is kind of. I feel like anytime somebody throws out a question, maybe 50% of the questions you will have help for. And I'm curious, like, why? Why help so much?
Uh, why not? I mean, we're all in this together at the end of the day. And if you can help somebody out, maybe they'll help somebody out, and maybe they'll help somebody out, and they'll pay it forward. And there's times where I need help,
Yeah.
and if I'm helping other people, I would hope that they would help me back. I just enjoy helping other people. I enjoy teaching them things. Just this past week, somebody that I just started working with, giving tips and tricks and whatnot, submitted his first bug and got rewarded his first bug on Bug Crowd. I think it was his first bounty ever, actually, and he was super excited to get the bounty. And it was fantastic to know that, hey, this bit of information, this little tip that I gave him last week, he went out and used actively, found a bug, submitted to the program, helped that program out, become more secure, and he got rewarded for it. And that's rewarding to me.
Yeah,
So just, I enjoy it.
absolutely. No, that I can tell you. So I haven't helped maybe as many people as you, but with the book, I get a lot of people that reach out,
Sure.
and and then they share, hey, I got my bounty, and it's a really cool feeling.
It's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's awesome to see that, and the reference to pay it forward. Because
Definitely.
it seems like a lot of people are kind of embodying that and taking that forward. So,
They should. It's a really good community.
yeah, thank you. I mean, you've helped me quite a bit, so throw it
Yeah.
out there publicly. Thank you very much, and even this interview, right?
Anytime. Anytime at all.
So, on that note, too, maybe transitioning a bit, but we've had those conversations in the Slack group, you and I, and I've asked you kind of about pen
Sure.
testing versus bug bounties, and I'm
Yeah.
curious. What does that look like? How has pen testing helped you with the bug bounties? But where is it also different if someone were thinking of taking their bug bounty experience into a full-time job?
Sure. Absolutely. So, you know, pen testing is quite a bit different, or can be quite a bit different from bounties in a couple different aspects. One of the one that comes up the most is going to be your scope. A lot of bug bounty programs will focus on a specific application. A lot of it is application penetration testing of a specific application, whereas with an actual pen test, you're generally going network application. Once you get in, you don't stop there like you do on a bounty. You pivot around the network, escalate your privileges, etc. Reuse information, take advantage of trust relationships, all of that sort of stuff. That's not something you can generally do on a bug bounty. And actually, I think that came up a couple years ago, either last year or the year before, where somebody did, pivot around a bit and kind of treated it like a pen test, which, you know, I can see both sides of the coin there. You know, showing the impact of a specific vulnerability is much easier if you can pivot around. You can't expect that the program is always going to know just how impactful that one bug is. You know, they understand the environment better than you do a lot of the times, but they may not understand or have the knowledge around how you can reuse the information from one bug and leverage it against other machines and compromise them holistically. However, on the flip side, you know, bug bounties have come a long way. I think a lot of them started with application testing, but now we're getting into IoT. I've even been part of a couple CTF type bug bounty programs where it was pretty much just a penetration test. You know, where you start in from the outside or from one tenant environment, and your goal is to capture the flags within the other tenant environments. And you do that however you can, you know, of course, using network application, not going and stealing servers or, you know, social engineering people, sending phishing emails, things like that. But I think bounties are really starting to, you know, come into a new form of, hey, it's not just application testing anymore, where we want to know all of this.
I remember reading that, or not reading, hearing that conversation you had with Sam when you were talking about that, and how you managed to do that with capture the flag.
Yep.
And it's interesting to take those skills and kind of parlay them in the bug bounties.
It helps. It definitely does.
Yeah. And I think it's also a good word of warning in terms of those that have that experience with pen testing, that bug bounties aren't pen testing.
No, they're not. They're not. You definitely need to read the program description, read the scope, see what you can and cannot do. If you're coming from a pen testing background, you want to get into bug bounties, think of a lot of them as, you know, application penetration tests. And then if the scope allows you to go a little bit further, then go a little bit further. One of the things that does translate pretty well actually from pen testing into the bounty world is a lot of the open scope projects or programs rather. That, you know, look at DoD, *.mil, or Yahoo, *.yahoo. In those sorts of programs, you can leverage, you know, your reconnaissance as part of your methodology for your bug hunting, identifying as many targets as possible, because the more targets you have, the more attack surface you have to attack. You know, and that's something that translates very nicely, but really only in those programs that allow it to. Other ones where you just have a specific URL that you're going after, a specific application that you're going after, you know, unfortunately, it doesn't translate as much there.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. So taking that, so we talked about kind of going from pen testing to bug bounties, but then we've also talked in the Slack channel about people that have come and applied to your team. And so maybe they're coming from bug bounties without the pen testing background, and they're looking to get into the industry. You've talked about kind of where there might be a bit of a skills gap, and what's helped you guys is actually having kind of like that vulnerable web app that someone comes in and attacks for an interview process.
Absolutely.
So what are some of those skills that you've seen that have been lacking, or something that the bug bounty participants can focus on and develop if they're going to be, say, applying to your team? What would you be looking for?
Sure, absolutely. So a lot of folks coming from the bug bounty side are going to have those application skills. They can go and find SQL injection. They can go find remote command execution in things like struts or JBoss. The places where they're generally lacking is going to be in network or in post-exploitation. So those are going to be things like, once you actually compromise that machine, which you can get RCE, you can get remote command execution or remote code execution in an application through an application vulnerability, but they don't generally have the experience of where do we go from there in a penetration test, because that's not something like we just talked about that you generally get to do in the bounty world. So being able to pivot around, once you get onto a machine, being able to move through post-exploitation, extracting credentials from the machine, escalating your privileges locally on a Windows or a Linux host, and then leveraging those credentials to get some form of lateral movement in the environment, escalating your privileges, things like that. Those are the types of skills that I think, you know, some hunters just lack if they're not coming from a pen testing background. They're coming from the bounty background. A great resource is actually Raphael Mudge's the creator of Cobalt Strike. He has, I think it's like 7, 8, 9 hour of free content just on YouTube for it's leveraging Cobalt Strike, which is a commercial tool. It costs a couple $1,000. But he walks through how to leverage Cobalt Strike to do all of these things, like escalating your privileges on a host, how to extract credentials from the host, how to get into lateral movement and user hunting and all that sort of stuff. So you can take away all of that information and learn those methodologies. You don't have to use Cobalt Strike to do it. He just does. But it's a great set of free resources that I highly recommend anybody go and watch and learn and study if they want to get into the pen testing world.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm definitely know I'm going to take a look at that, because those are the types of skills that I know for me, like I am that person, right? Like I know I'm lacking that
Sure.
because my experience has come from development and then getting into web applications. So
A lot of people do.
yeah, cool. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, no worries. And if anybody has any questions around pen testing, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Slack. Hit me up, ask me questions anytime.
Nice. That's. I hope people take care of it, or take advantage of that. I'd love to know if they do, to hear back
Sure.
specifically on the interview as well.
Absolutely.
So on that, we talked about pen testing, but there's also the opportunities with AppSec teams,
Sure.
and so I'm curious what your thoughts are. The difference between that. You've always done pen testing? Have you thought about going to AppSec? Is there a specific reason why you stayed with pen testing? Like, how do you balance both of those in
Sure.
terms of opportunities?
App testing or AppSec is really just one small area of penetration testing and security overall. I mean, penetration testing and offensive security is just one part of security overall. I love pen testing. I wouldn't like to move from a position where I have more scope capability into kind of just AppSec, which is why I wouldn't do that. I'm not a software developer. So I'm good at finding bugs. I'm terrible at building things. So I don't know that those skills would translate very well.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about that. Those conversations that I've had with AppSec teams, you're right. There's been that conversation around. There's the opportunity to continue coding,
Yep.
and doing that, and being on a new pen test team or a new opportunity now where I've joined a pen test team. There's not as much focus there. Like anything that you're going to be doing coding is going to be for your own tools.
Absolutely, exactly.
So yeah, it really depends on where you want to build that skill set. So it's good advice. I know I've talked to a number of people who are looking at different opportunities and thinking about where do they want to go. So yeah, thank you. Appreciate
Yeah,
that.
no worries.
So I'm just going back to my notes, and I'm looking at where we've gone, and we've covered a ton already. So one of the things that I did want to talk to you about is your success with bug bounties. And when we talk in Slack, there's a lot of reference to you finding higher impact vulns. And so I'm curious, like when you're sitting down to hack, are you not looking for those lower impact vulns? Like, are you just thinking, forget about the cross-site scripting, walk through the application and take that higher level look to avoid the dupes? Or like, is it just the knowledge? Like, how does that translate for you?
Sure, absolutely. So that's an interesting question for a couple of reasons. One, because this year I posted this around Twitter. My goal is to submit 365 bugs this year,
Yeah.
and that's tough to do. I think if you're not including kind of those P3s, if you will, and I'll use BugCrowd's VRT here. I do look for cross-site scripting and whatnot. I generally won't submit things probably under cross-site scripting.
Okay.
Maybe things like open redirects, and I don't even know where that falls in the VRT. I like to submit interesting bugs. I also am trying to keep my whatever the stat there is, my average priority above a 3. Or rather below a 3, whichever way you want to look at it. I think right now it's at like a 2.9 or something like that, or 2.8. I want to keep that kind of higher bugs because I think they're more fun, more interesting to find. But I'm definitely not opposed to submitting things like cross-site scripting. And that's why it's been an interesting question, just because I am trying to submit 365 bugs this year. So, I don't want to not submit bugs that I find that may be things like cross-site scripting, but I'm also trying to keep that average better. So it's a strange balance I'm doing right now. Thankfully, though, over the past few weeks, I've submitted quite a few P1s and P2s, which has really helped both submitting the 365 as well as keeping my average up. Um, so yeah, I don't necessarily look for the P4s and P5s. Sometimes you submit a bug that you think should be a P3 or P2.
Hmm.
The program disagrees, and hey, it happens. If they have good justification for it, and they explain that in a professional way, then I'm totally cool with it. I've over the past few weeks, I've submitted a couple bugs that I thought were probably P3s, maybe P2s, but they ended up being marked as a P4, which it happens. In cases like that, I probably just won't go back after that program again.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's so we talked about Twitter, and we've talked about kind of like the different priorities. One of the things that you had mentioned publicly in Twitter is the one of your most successful results has been on a program that's been out there forever.
Yeah,
You got in there late and you managed to, let's say, wreck it for lack of a better term. And so, why do you think that is? If you're not specifically setting a certain target for a bug class, or like you're open to kind of finding them all, why do you think you were so successful in that program?
I I have no idea why these bugs weren't found because this program, and I've been working on this program almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively, probably for the past 3 weeks or so. Um, and this program's been around for quite a long time. And I've just now, when you submit a bunch of bugs to a team, and I'm pretty sure I'm one of the only people, if not the only person working on this program right now,
Mm.
at least actively. So I've gotten to know their security team a little bit at this point, which is great because I really do love being able to work with the end client in a lot of these cases. I love working through the platforms. I love working with the bug crowd analysts, the triage analysts, and whatnot. I know quite a few of them by this point. And I do love working through them, but I also love having that communication with the backend client
Mm.
because it's nice to be able to go back and forth with them and kind of chat, get to know them, and whatnot. But um, so yeah, I've been working on this program for probably 3 weeks now. I have no idea why these bugs weren't found. I don't know if they've introduced new code in the past year and just nobody has gone back and looked at them. But I found SQL injection vulnerabilities throughout their platforms, their applications that I have one of them actually was a duplicate. So I'm actually surprised. There must be somebody else working on that program right now because you would assume that if that got submitted a year ago that they would have fixed it by now. But
You hope so.
you'd hope so. But I've submitted a ton of SQL injection vulnerabilities to them. I've submitted other issues, logical issues, which I really enjoy finding logic bugs in
Yeah.
applications. I've submitted a ton of them to them, and I have no idea why other people haven't found these. So really, that goes to show that if you're working on a program, first of all, don't not work on a program because it's old, because there can still be bugs there. Code is probably pushed to these things often.
Yeah.
Uh, don't just assume all of the bugs have been found because that's clearly not the case. Be thorough when you are learning a new program, or when you're jumping in a program and you're learning their application, how it works. Of course, you're going to get all of the bugs, or somebody's gotten all the bugs at the surface pretty much, unless they've introduced new code. But once you start learning the intricacies of the application, you start learning how the application works, you generally will have a better idea of where you can find bugs or what a bug may be. And then if you find some bugs, and this is pretty important as well, if you can find a bug that allows you to access other parts of the application that you're only able to get to because you found a bug, start looking for bugs there.
Hmm.
That's highly possible that other people haven't gotten to that level, so they haven't been able to explore that attack surface. So, that could be a gold mine of bugs.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I've had success recently with that type of idea. For me, it was going through JavaScript files, and similar
Hmm.
to kind of what Ben and Brett have talked about, like
Yep.
finding these new paths. It was a flaw in the JavaScript evaluation. They checked to see if you were an admin in the JavaScript, and
Of
so
course.
yeah, and then as a result, it just opened up this massive attack surface that it seemed like nobody else touched.
Exactly. And that's huge. And I do, going through JavaScript files, usually they'll be minified or minified, however you pronounce that.
Yeah,
I just go throw those guys into JS Beautify,
yep,
and start looking through the code, look through the paths. One of the things that I've been successful with is if those are just huge, huge JavaScript files, find out a couple of requests that you've already made, and start searching for the variables, the parameters there. In that huge JavaScript file, and just kind of find how they are structuring it, how they're structuring the code, how they're structuring the endpoints and the parameters being passed through to it. That way you can very quickly find other endpoints. But yeah, that's definitely something that people should be doing. I actually just submitted a bug the other day, or did I even submit it? No, no, I didn't submit it just yet because I'm still trying to hear back from the program. I asked them if this particular case would be considered a bug, if it's something that I should not be allowed to do, but I can do it. I proved that I can do it.
yeah.
Is there's a list of roles in the application that when you're creating a new user account, and one of those roles isn't actually in the dropdown, but it's in the JavaScript. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know if that role should be able to be created, if a user should be able to create it with that role. So I'm waiting to hear back from the program on that. But if you're not reading the code, then you would have never known about this particular role.
Yeah.
So
No, exactly. That's awesome. And that's a huge tip. Because I know talking with other people, people aren't going through the JavaScript files and looking for paths and whatnot. So
you should
that,
absolutely have to.
yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you very much for sharing that. That's wicked. And on the reference to shipping code, I can share. The few programs that I've talked to directly that are big programs. They say they ship code. They have continuous integration, so they're doing it 30,
Huge.
40 times a day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I mean, just like you mentioned, one of the programs that I've been most successful on was a mature program with the top people in HackerOne, and I thought, why am I going to spend my time here? I happened to get lucky early, and I thought, oh, okay, there's still some bugs here, and I spent my
Sure.
time there, and it was a gold mine for me, which I
Absolutely.
almost walked away from because of the reputation of other people there.
Yeah, yeah. Don't let that dissuade you. If jump into a program, get your grips on the program and figure out kind of what it does, what the application does. If it's an open scope program, I believe there was a post that Shubs and Nathan, I believe Nathan did last year, or the year before, on actively scanning for things like new DNS records, new hosts that are popping up. If you're not doing that, and actually, I think that's what Ben just did as well in that post either yesterday or the day before, where they identified new hosts. It just popped online, and they knew that because they're continually doing their reconnaissance. That's really important for those open scope programs. So just like code changes, new hosts are going to pop up, new applications are going to pop up. So if you can somehow automate that, or just keep looking for those hosts or those code changes, then you'll set yourself up for success.
On the automation note, is that something that you employ, that you do? You try to keep the automation from the recon perspective?
Not necessarily, not to any real extent. So uh, one of the things that I do during reconnaissance is, of course, subdomain brute forcing.
Yep.
But I also use scans.io data, so Project Sonar data, and that gets updated, I think, once a week or so, depending on what you're grabbing from them. So they have like the FDNS and the RDNS stuff, as well as the SSL stuff. So I'll grab that stuff weekly whenever it comes out, and then I'll go grep through it for different programs. I'll also use GitHub. I'll also use Google, and just constantly search those things. GitHub's a great place to go and find information. This year alone, I've probably made 10K off GitHub findings.
Wow.
So yeah, it's one of those things that I know now that I've said it, and I've told a lot of people about it. They're going to start going and finding those things, and that's fine. That's
Yeah.
great. But that's one of those places where I go, and I've found several P1s this year just by finding creds on GitHub. And I do this in penetration testing as well. If I have a client that I know is coming up and I have a schedule, let's say they start next Monday, and I have time to go and do passive reconnaissance on them. A lot of the times these pen tests will be won before we even get started.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. Just the amount of information that people push to GitHub that either they didn't realize they were pushing or they didn't actually properly delete from their commit history, because that is a huge place to go and look. The amount of information that's out there is insane, and there's lots of sensitive information out there that they've pushed that you can go and submit for bugs, and be pretty successful with submitting those.
Nice. It's an embarrassing story, but on that note, like so when I first started with development, using Git repos and all that kind of stuff, I remember I committed keys to a repository, and
Yep.
yeah, the lead dev was like, "What are you doing? Like, don't do that." And I was like, "No, that's fine. No, I'll just remove the commit. Don't worry. I'll delete that commit." And no, it's not gone. And so hopefully some developer will hear this and learn. But for those hackers that are there, yeah, it's always there in the commit history.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if you just think you can delete those keys, repush, and not delete that commit history, or remove it, you're gonna have a bad day. And then at that point, you really need to, and this is my recommendation that I give to all these programs where I find these things, is really need to go and revoke those keys. You need to, first of all, remove them, remove that commit history, revoke those keys, identify what those keys gave access to, because that data is potentially now compromised, all of it. So take that information, revoke the keys, go find out what those keys had access to, see what they had access to, and then figure out, do you need to either notify people or maybe change passwords in that system or what have you. It really depends on what you've committed, but it's a dangerous one.
Yeah, and that's awesome advice too from the bug bounty hunters perspective as well, because when we're submitting those reports, and for the people that are watching this, you need to identify the impacts and need to identify the potential to remediate. Right?
Absolutely.
Programs appreciate that, and they might not understand the impact. Like if they have developers who don't know not to do that, then they might not necessarily understand the impact of what you've reported, which can have an impact on what they award you.
Exactly. That's actually great advice right there, is show impact.
Yeah.
Show impact. It doesn't matter if, you just submit a report that says you've leaked credentials, and also validate that those credentials work first before you go and submit them, because if they don't work, you're going to get marked as not applicable NA, and it can really kind of screw up your reputation. You're also wasting the time of those people.
Yeah.
If they knew that and those either didn't work or they weren't important or what have you. So investigate the impact of those things and make sure you explain to them very point blankly why this is important, why this is why this is dangerous, because otherwise, you're not going to get your fullest amount unless they understand that.
Yep. Sweet. Nice. So there's two things that I wanted to touch on
Sure.
coming out of this conversation. Was one, you talked about kind of going at the program, it being mature and that kind of thing. Do you go back to the programs, like after a specific period of time? Like, let's say you don't necessarily find something in the reconnaissance,
Sure.
but it's been a month, 2 months since you've touched that program.
Yeah, absolutely. I always go back. I do it pretty frequently, actually. I'll go back, at least on BugCrowd's platform. This is how this works, is they've got the pages, so I'll sort by newest, and then I'll just go back to the very last page and just start clicking through and say, what programs haven't I touched recently? And I'll go back and look through them, and sure enough, either scopes change, which you get emails about if a scope changes on a program, at least if you're, I think, signed up for notifications on that program. I think that's how that works. But I'll just scroll through and say, what sounds interesting today? What do I want to go and attack? And sometimes I have a fairly bad memory, so I'll come across a bug or something I thought was a bug, and then either I won't fully exploit it, or something will happen. I'll completely forget about this bug. I'll get sidetracked, or something happens, right? Life happens. And then I'll go back and I'll see that program name and I'll say, wait a minute, didn't I have a bug in this program that I was working on? And then I'll jump back into it. So yeah, I always go and revisit old programs.
And is it the same methodology for you? Like you just hit the reset button completely? Or are you looking at like a burp history and trying to step
Both.
back from where you were? Yeah? Okay.
Both. So starting with a clean slate, I think is important because it's like having a new set of eyes on it, a new perspective on it. But actually going back and looking at burp history, this is something I tweeted out a couple months ago as well. Load your old burp histories because it's possible that if you're using something like Collaborator, Collaborator has some findings sitting there waiting for you that you didn't see because maybe, this operation only runs every 2 weeks or so, and that operation you've actually injected into. And so now when you go and reload your burp history or your burp state, now that bug is sitting there waiting for you. And you're like, I don't remember this bug. You look into it and you're like, wow, that injected some XML or SQL injection or what have you, that at some point in time, some process took this data, used it somewhere, called back to the burp collaborator server, and you now have the information. You can go submit that as a bug as long as you can validate that that's actually happened. So yeah, both of those things are important. Stepping back and taking a fresh perspective, but also revisiting old burp states.
Nice. The other thing, the goals. I'm interested to kind of hear about that because I've sat down and written mine out for this year as well, and I didn't have any last year when I was doing it because it was really just getting the community.
Yeah.
So for you, is it just 365 bugs? And how do you land on that? How's it going? And are there any other goals for you?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a fairly goal-oriented person. I like setting up goals for myself and then trying to hit those goals because I feel like if I don't, then I'll get kind of lazy. So setting up those goals is fun, especially when you're hitting them and you're doing it. It just makes it more fun, more thrilling.
Yeah.
So my official goal I set for this year was 365 bugs. I didn't want to say one bug every day because I knew there would be days where I wasn't going to bug hunt. I was going to be too busy, or I'd be traveling on vacation or what have you. That just life happens and you won't have time. So I said instead, okay, let's do 365 bugs. So one for every day, just about, for the year. And that's it. And so far, I'm doing pretty well, I believe. Let's see. I believe that. What are we at? I'm pretty sure I'm at it right now still. And it's been difficult. There have been some programs that or some bugs that didn't get accepted, and that happens. And I'm considering those part of the submissions as well. If they're just kind of marked as a risk accepted by the program, I still consider that submitting a bug if I know it's just not like a not applicable. But let's see. So this far, I've submitted around 70 bugs so far, which I think that makes it. Let's see, how many days since January 1st? Yep, here we go. So it has been 68 days since January 1st. So my 70 bugs, I'm right on target. Well, so that's my official goal for the year. It's funny because I was gonna. I assumed I'd be submitting, quite a few P3s as well, quite a lot of P3s. So what I was going to do was next year I was going to set my goal to 12 P1s, a P1 a month. But I think I've actually hit that this year already, which is funny because I didn't think I was going to so quickly, but I have. So I've actually set up an unofficial goal for myself to try to make 50K in bugs just this year. Which I should be able to hit as long as I keep on keeping on.
Yeah, awesome. That's sweet. It's pretty motivating to hear, and yeah, I found that for me the goals have been motivating as opposed to demotivating.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely,
I've been hitting them, and I think the key is to make sure they're achievable.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't be too insane, and I'm gonna make $500,000 a year in bug bounties unless you're doing it full time. And I know there are quite a few bug hunters out there that can hit that. I don't think I don't see myself hitting that. I think that would be a lot of work, a ton of work to do that. So I'm pretty happy with my goals. 365 bugs, and if I can hit 50K, that'll be great. Which if I'm keeping on the same track I'm at, I may be able to do, if not double that. So I'm pretty happy about that.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I'll definitely be rooting for you. Hopefully everyone else
Thanks.
listening is as well. So I mean, we're nearing the 50-minute mark here, and I've obviously taken up time on your Saturday,
No
as well
worries.
as from your goals. So again, I just want to reiterate a huge thank you for that. Before we sign off, I'm just curious if there's any specific advice you have for new hackers that are coming, and maybe starting up on Bugcrowd, HackerOne, what have you.
Sure, absolutely. Let's see. I would definitely recommend picking up the Web Application Hackers Handbook V2, also known as the Application Penetration Testing Bible. Read through that. It's thick. It's big.
Yeah.
So you don't think you're going to do it in one sitting, but read through that, understand why these bugs exist. That's very
Yeah.
important to do is understand why these bugs exist. I'd say get involved in the community because it is a fantastic community. It's like a sub community. The bug bounty community is sub community of InfoSec, uh,
Mm.
and it's a great community. It really is. So get involved, meet some good people. Anything you learn, you should. I always recommend sharing it with people because if you're sharing bugs and hacking around with other people, you're going to learn much quicker. Set some goals up for yourself. Don't feel like you're gonna, don't feel intimidated. Go
Mm.
submit bugs, validate those bugs before you submit them because you don't want to waste programs' times. And most importantly, if you're submitting bugs, you will get invited to private programs, and private programs are another place where you can go and submit bugs that's, they're private. There's only so many researchers on them, so you have more opportunity to find bugs there. Um, go read tons and tons of blog posts on um, other bugs that have already been found. There's a ton of great blogs out there. People blog about their bugs they find, how they found them, how they exploited them. Go read them. Understand why they work. Set up a lab for yourself so that you can understand these things. That's definitely my advice to new bug hunters.
That's awesome. That's a ton in there, and I can tell you, like I've been doing this 16 months, right? So not a long time, and that advice was pretty much bang on. Like I wish I had that in a nutshell when I started. For
Yeah,
me, I was like when I came into the community, I don't. It was the imposter syndrome, right? Like I was
sure.
like petrified that someone was just going to step out and say, "You don't know what you're doing. Why are you even trying?"
If anybody does that, they are a terrible person and they should be shamed. That's I mean, those are just not good people. Mute them, block them on Twitter. Don't pay attention to them, and continue on. Excuse me.
No worries. It's yeah, and I echo it. And if anybody has those kind of concerns or those questions, I'm on Twitter as well. And what I found to be helpful is to look at people like yourself and look at other key bug bounty hunters and see who they're following on Twitter,
Yep.
because you end up finding good resources that way. And just like you mentioned, people are going to be tweeting about their articles, and then you see it the retweets. And I can't echo enough. You guys are doing an awesome job on the Reddit NetSec. I'm there often, and the articles that are there are definitely high caliber, great learning resources. So thanks very much for that work as well.
No problem.
So on that note, I think we'll end it here. I've said it multiple times, but again, thank you so much for sitting down, sharing this. There's been a ton of information here, and I know I tend to shy away from listening to the interviews myself because I hate hearing my own voice, but this will definitely be one that I
Sure.
go back to and I listen to. So thank you very much.
Anytime. Happy to do it.